checks on it. I'm wearing a blue jacket, and I'm sitting in a room with a blue background. So thank you for allowing me to join you today.
All right, cool. And before we begin the questions, I totally did forget to give a quick image description of myself, which is my name is Jessica, and I am the statewide youth organizer. I am a brown Latina woman with dark brunette hair, dark brown eyes. I have the Yo Disabled and Proud logo in the background, which is white and blue. And then we also do have an image of Dante, as well, for folks to be able to know who he is. With that, let's start the questions. So first question would be, well, hi, Dante. Welcome to our Yo Disabled and Proud 6 Disabled Voices of Color speaker series. This series is a way for us to connect with disabled youth on critical topics. Intersectionality, ableism, and disability justice continue to be hot topics amongst disabled youth. Intentionality, making space to bring in disabled leaders of color like yourself and spotlighting the magnificent work you are doing on behalf of our community is one of the ways we choose to educate and build leadership skills within our disabled youth. We really appreciate you taking your time to share your individual experiences with us today. We like to start our interviews with every single speaker with a simple question that is oftentimes overlooked. And that is, the last couple of years have highlighted for us what we need as a community and how important check-ins have been. With that said, how are you doing and how are you feeling as a disabled leader living throughout this pandemic?
It's a great question, Jessica. Thank you. And it is rare, that people, especially for those of us that are lucky enough to be in leadership positions, it's actually rare for people to ask us how we're doing, right? We are the folks that most often are expected to keep it together and to rally around other people and make sure that they're doing okay. And so it is a rare thing, but I am surrounded by good friends. I see some of them are on in the audience today, and I feel like I'm doing well. Lots going on in my life, mostly positive, and so I'm happy to celebrate that. But it is busy, and I feel like I'm turning in a million different directions at the same time. You're muted.
My bad. Thank you. I think it's really important more often than not to talk about how we are doing emotionally and so on, because our individual health is oftentimes overlooked. So it's always important to discuss that and be able to do those individual check-ins for each and every single one of us to know that we're okay and that we're dealing with everything that is surrounding us, because we are all facing some hard times on a national level. So it's great to be able to check.
For sure.
With that, as someone who has served on multiple positions, such as the California Department of Public Health's Office on Health Equity, Chevron Kaiser, what do you feel has yet to be discussed with regards to disability rights? And what issues have yet to be touched on more?
So that's a great question, a really big question. And I think that the fact that diversity, equity, and inclusion is such an important and hot topic right now, it gives credence to introduce conversations about disability. And I think that it's rare that folks see disability as an element of diversity or even of equity. And there's so few of us, especially when you get into leadership positions, to encounter people with just visible disabilities is a rarity. And so we're often very segmented, very isolated. And I think that there is a need to have welcome conversations, because in general, the general public is very reluctant to have conversations about disability. And I actually come from a background where I was trying to be very inclusive. So I was trying to join the group of able-bodied folks. I'm a wheelchair user. And so I was trying to jump over onto the other side. So as a result, it meant that if you didn't talk about my disability, I wouldn't talk about it either. But at the same time, I was encountering a situation that put me at a disadvantage because I wasn't talking about what my true needs were, because I was trying to sort of cover them up as if they didn't exist. And so I think as we become more inclusive, both in society in general and in the workplace in specific, I think we need to be more open to those conversations. And especially those of us with disabilities, we have to be more in tune, inclined to really stand up for what our individual needs are and what would make for a more inclusive environment.
I really do feel that very much. I recently had spoken on the 40th anniversary of the National Organizing on Disability. And something that I touched on is, as someone that already is part of different groups, I already am combating a lot of individual trauma, based on my individual background. So more often than not, that leads one to not really speaking about your individual needs, being a disabled individual, because you're already confronting different issues within the different categories of what you fit. So that totally definitely connects. And I truly do know that that's been hard. And that's something I am trying to work on more on an individual level, but also as a youth organizer, making sure that our youth have an understanding of themselves and make sure that their voices are being heard, because that is a big issue that I feel that a lot of people can relate to. So thank you so much for that. In addition, would you be able to talk a little bit more about your career journey and how you found your path into policy, doing some policy work and advocacy and pretty much everything you do? Because I feel that you have done a little bit of everything. So very, very impressive resume.
Yeah. I'm definitely an individual who likes to explore new things. And so I can't say that there 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would think that I would be the executive director of a savings and investment program for people with disabilities. Or moreover, my next step, I actually have been named or nominated by President Biden to join his administration as the commissioner for the Rehabilitation Services Administration and the Department of Education. And neither of those were things that I have said, oh, I've dedicated my career to get to these places. So I originally started off some 25, maybe almost 27 years ago in communication, because everybody told me, oh, you're such a great speaker. And I was a writer, and I thought, okay, communications is what I want to do. I want to work in television is what I thought that I would spend my life doing. And so I went into TV news, and I was a writer and producer, worked in San Francisco, here in Sacramento, on television news. But the one thing that was really consistent with me is that for a lot of news people, that sort of needs to be a calling for you, because the hours are horrible. I remember my first shift in San Francisco, I worked from 2:30 in the morning to 12 noon. And I worked every holiday. I worked nights. And so it was something that is really draining on you. And if your internal mechanism is not to be a newsman, then I would say that that's a difficult environment to be in. And so what I tried to do is apply what I was good at, and that was writing and communicating stories, and nonprofits sort of started calling me. And my first role was with a children's advocacy organization where I did media relations. And that led to healthcare organizations where, again, I was telling the story of others to try and promote whether it was a hospital or a healthcare care system or business objectives. And those really, my skills really translated well into those environments. But the one consistent thing that I've always done is I've chosen organizations that sort of pulled at my heartstrings. What are the things that really motivate me as a person? So at the end of the day, in addition to getting a paycheck, I feel like I'm making a difference in the world. And so when I was at Kaiser in specific, one of the things that drove me the most was talking about disparities in health. And so that led me to continue to talk about the differences that we experience, whether it's based on race, ethnicity, our socioeconomic status, and when you get into the Kaiser system, you would think, okay, the playing field is even, right? Because we all have this very similar type care. We have the same type of access to those providers. But when you saw that it was still very different, even in that environment, it led me to look even broader. And so that took me to the state of California, where I worked in the Office of Health Equity. And this was a brand new department, and it focused very much on those things that interested me deeply and personally. And so I really enjoyed it. But one of the things that I recognized even there, even in an office that was established on equity, disability was really sort of an afterthought. And so I brought that to the table as much as I could. And I decided that my next role would be directly related to the disability community. And so I found the role at CalAble and said, that's my next job. I want that job. And I chased it, and it came to me. And now, so my next role in front of me, I'm pending Senate confirmation, but it actually came to me. There were folks in the Biden administration, and I have to give them a lot of credit for this. They were specifically looking for leaders in state services that had experience with disability advocacy, particularly those who had disabilities themselves. And so they reached out and had a conversation with me and said, we're going to find a place that fits you, rather than saying, oh, well, what is the one thing that you're doing? Can we place you in that? And so I really do applaud the administration for looking for people like me and then finding opportunities for us. It's really been a great experience. You're muted again.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself. I am very, very honored to know that we're going to have you as our representation. I truly feel that the more people we see that look like us, who are able to sit in high positions, the better that we are doing as a community. Because I, more often than not, tell people it gives me more sense of a motivation when you're able to see someone that looks like you and has gone through similar struggles be in a position of power, because it does provide a sense of hope for the future. So yeah, I'm so very honored that you're gonna be representing us, and I applaud you for that. Such an amazing win, not only for us, but also for the White House. They're very lucky.
Thank you.
With that, I do have another things, because we discussed a little bit about different communities and intersectionality. So my question for you would be, in your opinion, how can diverse youth groups come together to express the intersectionalities of our lives and identities without being ableist, but instead creating a more inclusive space?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think that um, in my experience, there are people who do it really well. And during the pandemic, it was right around the time of the George Floyd killing that my daughter became very, very civically active. And she was in high school at the time. And so I decided that I was going to join her when she went to protest marches, when she was really sort of finding her way. And the thing that really struck me in those environments is that of how inclusive they were. I remember going to my first march and just hearing folks talk about or letting me know how welcome I was being in a wheelchair and saying that here's what we're going to do. We're going to make sure that you are okay. And so what that means for us is we're not going to put you to the front. We're not going to put you to the back. We want you to be in the middle. So there's somebody behind you that's looking for you and somebody ahead of you that wants to make sure that that you're taken care of. Because the environments that we were going through, they weren't always designed with wheelchairs in mind. A lot of times we're walking in the middle of streets. Those streets can have various potholes and whatnot. Or we can go into an area that doesn't have a curb cut out. And as long as there was somebody ahead of me to say, hey, we need to make sure that Dante is going to be okay. And there was somebody that was making sure that I didn't get left behind. It just made me feel welcome and a part of that environment. And really, that was the first time that I truly felt not just welcome, but that that folks were concerned about what my needs were and were willing to come to me directly and ask me. And I think that in most environments, and you may have experienced this yourself, but in most environments, people see a person with a disability and they're like, what can I do for them, right? Whether they need a door opened or not, I'm going to open that door. Whether they need a push or not, I'm going to give that person a push. And I felt like the protest environment was like, how can we include you in a way that empowers you, that makes you feel welcome, and it just really helps you to feel included. And so I really enjoyed that. And it wasn't just about being a person with a disability. I think that so often we're asked to segment ourselves. In this room you go in, you're going to be a person in a wheelchair. But in this room you go into, you're going to be a Black man. And in this room that you go into, you're going to be a person of a certain age. And it's never that simple. We have to go in there wearing all of our identities at once. And it would be great if we could carve one off and say, oh, I only have to think this way in this room. But the reality, the intersectionality makes our differences more complex. It makes them a little heavier. And especially if you have to cover one up to go into a particular environment, the weight of those various identities becomes even too much of a burden, right? And so the older I get, the more I learn I have to carry the things that I'm able to, and I have to put down the things that are too heavy for me. And so I like to go into every room that I enter as myself. I try to talk the same way that I talk in one environment in the next, because those extra masks that I put on myself became all encompassing, to where it was sort of difficult for me to even tell you, well, who am I when I take off all of these extra things that I added to myself. So that's what I would say in particular about intersectionality and inclusion.
That got me emotional because I genuinely do feel that. I tell people I was born with heart disease, and it was something that I carried with me throughout from elementary, well, from age of born all the way to high school. So like it was a process of like getting accustomed to being taken out of classes, going to hospital visits, going to cardiologists, so on, like having to have special things regarding you, like, and like being seen differently, and like being able to like try to separate that from your individual person. Because I tell people I can't erase my brownness, because that's who I am. Like that's what I'm going to present, as same as like I can't erase that I had a disability or have a disability and like had to be like taken out of class on a continuous basis, because that's just like something that I've carried with me. So it was a process, and I can say that I'm also very grateful, and I feel you. Like I had amazing teachers and professors who were empathetic, were able to truly understand, and like even through some emotional traumas of like feeling less worthy, like being able to have that sense of mutual respect and understanding, and like really making me feel like I'm worthy of being a person, like was something that like I can like say I'm very grateful and honored to them, and that like it's something that I take with me. So please do know like what you're saying really does connect, and and it's something that's really important to be able to discuss. And I think that fits perfectly well with like our next question, which is you recently were a speaker at the Black Men and Mental Health Conference. That conference touched on a variety of challenges Black men face. As an advocate for disability justice and its intersectionalities with multiple challenges faced within the Black community, what changes do you hope to see within the disability community to making sure that all people have their voices be heard?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really stood out to me in that conversation, and this was, that panel was in Washington, D.C. It was at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's annual conference. And there were really powerful Black men talking about their mental health. And it was breathtaking, really, because number one, I don't, let me just go there. I don't see other Black men really focused on mental health. I don't see a lot of Black people in general talk about therapy. I don't regularly, like I said at the very beginning, you don't regularly even get that question of how are you doing and expect to give a real answer, right? Usually it's, oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine. We're doing okay. And so that panel, to be in that environment, to be talking to really professional people that are sometimes struggling with the same things that I sometimes struggle with, was rewarding. And what I really hope that the disability community can take full advantage of is to know that there's help, to know that that there are peers out there who may be experiencing the very same things that you are, and that sometimes you may be struggling with something and thinking that you're the only one that's struggling with it. And the reality is that's not true. We are very much in similar boats, even if our conditions are the same, even if our disabilities are not the same. We experience the same types of things and need to be able to lay some of those burdens down. And so having a network of people, I remember when I was younger, I was very reluctant to go to any type of support group or peer counseling. I was like, oh, I don't belong in that group and I don't need to be there, et cetera. It was something that even I was very reluctant to, and there was a stigma to me attached to it. But now that I look back, it was like, I wish I would have taken advantage of those situations. One of my closest friends, April Dawson, is in the audience today. And April and I are in very similar places professionally, have led very similar lives personally. And just to have her as someone that I can sort of, forgive the pun because I don't have any hair, but let my hair down with, and to say, here's what I don't understand, or here's what I'm struggling with today, and have somebody who truly understands in a way that most others can't because they haven't lived it, is extremely important to me.
That is very refreshing. Like, honestly, I genuinely do feel that I am learning a lot and like being able to utilize a lot of this with me because with regards to mental health, I feel at least that is a common struggle that I have seen for a lot of BIPOC folks, that like mental health is oftentimes a conversation that's not discussed as much as it should be. Like, I do know that like also in my household, that's always been a big issue. I think that's what pushed my brother to go into the psychology realm, because like so much trauma, and especially when you carry so much generational trauma, like in with regards to me, like coming from an immigrant background and carrying like the struggles and the pain of like my parents and so on, like that trauma that is carried from one generation to the other. My brother was very much like, we need to like have a psychologist in the family to be able to help deal with this, because there's a lot of stuff that like needs to be like discussed and that we need to be able to navigate on, because it's we can't continuously be going through the same things without learning how to find ourselves, or how to give like ourselves some grace and time and space to be able to like let loose and just be able to feel. Because oftentimes, like I do know, like I've been in so many realms, like we're working, and oftentimes it's like, where do you come in the picture? Like, where is there time and space for one to be able to let themselves be free and be able to let themselves feel like individual emotions without feeling that they are carrying the world around them, just because that is kind of like the community or like the space and the kind of position that they were put in to be able to do so. Yeah. Another question for you, which I feel that this is also a big thing for a lot of folks, is talking about like income inequalities and different things with like individual financial barriers. So my question would be, in your opinion, what are financial barriers to living as a person with a disability? Nevertheless, what are ways that we can make sure that our voices are being heard and presented to create like a better sense of more income equality for us to make sure that we have a space in the circle?
Yeah, that is a great question. Thank you. And really, the economic inequalities for people with disabilities are broad. First and foremost, people with disabilities are less likely to work. So we are more likely to be unemployed or underemployed. We are more likely to be unbanked, meaning that we don't have a financial home that we go to. So we're going to have to rely upon services that cost us the most at the worst possible times. We are a lot of the things that were designed to help people with disabilities, like benefits programs, like SSI. And as helpful as those programs are to provide basic living expenses, they've also limited people with disabilities by saying, well, if you do work, we're going to cut off your day-to-day expenses. Or if you save money to plan for your future, we're going to cut you off from what you need today. So the pathways to become self-sufficient, to become independent, become more difficult. And the reality is it leads to folks thinking that they can't ever work or plan for the future. And that really is was the driving force for me with CalAble, to know that there is a program that allows you to, even if you're on benefits, that you can save and plan for things that you may have thought that you could never afford. And so the one thing that I would love to, if for everyone who's listening to walk away from, if you can establish saving habits the younger you are, the better off you will be. Just save. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. It doesn't have to be, you have to invest that money, although that's helpful. But as long as you can make a habit of, I'm going to start saving money, because that saving habit will go through the rest of your life. It'll help you make decisions that are for the overall betterment of your life. Not just saying it's going to help me 20 years from now. It's going to help me decide what are the things that are really important for my life. And those are the ways that I'm going to spend my money. Because I've bought a lot of things that I may have used once and spent too much money on things that I've never used, or clothes that became out of style or whatever. But it really is having some discipline and a habit around savings that is the most important thing.
This is really good, because like, as someone who's young, I feel that oftentimes we get so encaptured with like what's new and so on, that I'm trying to do better at saving. Like, that's also something my parents tell me, not the greatest, but working on it. But it's like something that I also do take, because I do recognize the importance of being able to have some sense of financial stability, especially when trying to become part of like your independent self, separating from like your individual family. So thank you. And then my last question before we open it up for a Q&A would be, multiple members within the disability rights realm fit in more than one identity. With that said, what does disability justice mean for you? And what resources would you recommend for people to learn more about disability justice?
Yeah, great question. So disability justice to me means being on that level playing field, right? So that no matter what your physical ability is, it doesn't, other people won't make assumptions about what your mental capacity is. Or if you have intellectual issues, it doesn't take away from your internal sense of dignity. And so disability justice is really celebrating people for all that they are, rather than looking at them in a very limiting way. And as far as resources are concerned, rather than pointing folks to books that they can study or ways to educate themselves, I want this to be really personal. And I want you to look at your own family. Look at the people who are around you, and really look at how we are if you're closed-minded about something, or if you see that there are people in your family that are closed-minded about something, ask yourself, how can you broaden that? I grew up in a family that was very homophobic, said things that were, not polite words to say. And I remember, and even though I'm not part of the LGBTQ community, I remember having a conversation with one of my parents and saying, what difference does it make? How do we broaden ourselves? In the same way that my parents have had to stick up for me, what difference does it make that he walked with a crutch or in a wheelchair? So rather than looking outside in the world, what can you do at home? What can you do to the people around you that mean the most to you? How can we expand our awareness, our sensitivity for the people that we love the most? I think is truly, truly important.
Thank you. Like that does mean a lot, and that does say a lot, because everything does start internally with the people that surround us, and like who we learn from and grow from, and who also learn from us. So I definitely hear that. With that, I'm gonna pass it towards our statewide organizer, Mr. Goldie, to be able to ask some of our Q&A questions, as well as any additional questions folks may have.
Right.
See questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much, Dante, for taking your time to be here. And as a Black male in a wheelchair and working through the ranks of society to put myself in a position to be able to be and support others in the demographic in the community. How can one become more involved in something like getting information and spreading about where to go for things like Black men and mental health? Because it is true, in households and many cultures, there's that stigma. And we speak on it and we have these conversations and we self-reflect. How can we reach our younger youth and our younger individuals, and with techniques on opening that chakra to let them know that, have a conversation with a friend or someone, or just start having that conversation? What made you aware of it?
Yeah. To be perfectly honest, it was struggling, and knowing that I could not continue to struggle alone, that I needed somebody to help me. And so the good news is that we are closer to our resources than we've ever been before, right? So we now have the ability, you don't have to leave your home to meet with a group of people who are focused on self-improvement in the same way that you are. You don't have to leave your home to go to therapy. So there are groups out there that you can tap into, even if you can't get out of the house, right? Even if you don't want to get out of the house. There are some larger organizations, if you need some help finding folks. NAMI is the National Association of Mental Illness. They have local chapters throughout the state, and they can help folks. They have lots of resources on their website. They can point you to resources if you want to find a therapist, if you want to find a support group, those things are available to you. And that's just one resource of many, but the idea is find some people where it's okay to talk about what you're going through. Sometimes they're professionals. A lot of times they're friends that are going through the same thing, but may have been afraid to. And the idea is to create these safe environments where you can begin to sift through whatever help you need.
Thank you. I appreciate that response, because it is true that searching at home is better than looking around outside for that reflection.
Yeah.
Because we got to look in self first, next to our most highest power. We do have a question from Dan Oakenfuss. Many of our disabled and proud volunteers are college students in California. Given your education at UC Davis and USC, what advice can you give your young advocates to ensure their access needs are being met on campus?
Yeah. How you doing, Dan? First and foremost, good to hear from you. I think the true lesson is becoming a self-advocate. And that requires a level of self-awareness, right? It paying attention to what are my needs? What are the things that will help me navigate this situation? And then not being shy about communicating those things. The great thing about most colleges and universities is that they have a great desire to do well and a high level of sensitivity around the needs of others. And so usually if you point out a need, they can be very active at trying to fulfill them. That does not happen all the time, though. And so there are times where you will have to be a self-advocate. But for the very reasons that we were talking about, those heavy burdens that we carry, you'll also have to be able to navigate and decide which are the battles that are worth fighting. And I tell folks all the time, especially when I make new friends or start new relationships, those people become aware of all the things that I have to deal with in my day, and they want to fight every single battle. And I tell them, if I did fight every single battle, I would have no time left in my day or my life to do the things that I really need to do or want to do, because I would be fighting against microaggressions every day. I mean, just this morning, to get into my office building, I had to sort of get into it, yell at some construction workers because they blocked off the sidewalk to the only accessible entrance to my building. And they didn't do anything to make it accessible. So I had to, who's in charge here? And, oh, we're sorry, we forgot. You shouldn't forget. That shouldn't happen. And so to hold people responsible, and that was a battle that was big enough for me to fight, because this is how I make my living. You know, for young people, figure out what are those battles that have to be fought for you, that you have to fight for yourself, and then the ones that you're willing to get some help with, or get others to advocate on the behalf of the whole, or whatnot. So just learning to navigate is an important part of the life of any person with a disability.
Thank you, Dante. Very informative. We have another question from the audience. What will you do? What will you be doing in your new position?
Yeah. So my new role, pending Senate confirmation, please pray for me or have high hopes for me that all goes smoothly and fast. I will be the commissioner of the Rehabilitation Services Administration as part of the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation in the Department of Education. And the goal of the Rehabilitation Services Administration is to really elevate and empower people with disabilities in their educational goals and in employment goals, to get as many people with disabilities working as possible. And so my job will be to lead that agency as we develop, implement, monitor vocational rehabilitation organizations across the country to make sure that we all have opportunities for competitive integrated employment, and not just a job, but that it's a career with a career path to be able to move to the best of our abilities. And so I don't want to minimize working as a part of that economic picture that I talked. Working is more than putting food on the table. Working is more than independence. Working is really one of the major ways that we find purpose in our lives. And so our ability to be able to contribute to things that are better than just our individual, bigger than just our individual day, is an important part of our purpose of being, and really enhances our quality of life. And so to be able to work to expand that really makes me feel like this is what I was brought to this planet to do.
Very nice, Dante. You seem like a very nice and jovial individual with a lot of stuff on your plate. What are some things you use to decompress and de-stress in your life? Because you have a lot going and it's not stress-free, and we have to take that personal time for self-care.
I think the first thing I'll say are family and friends, the people that love me and that I love, being surrounded by those folks and enjoying time with them is the most important part of my life. And so I would much rather be doing nothing with somebody that I really care about than doing important things for people that I don't know at all. So that is a stress reliever, just being around the people I love. The other things that I do is I love Game of Thrones. And so if I can watch a good TV show or a great movie, those are really the ways that I try to decompress. And the thing that I'm finding more and more important is, in order to feel better on the inside, exercising, working out to feel better in your body, and really connect the mind, and the mind and the body are definitely connected. The more I'm active, the better I feel.
So true, so true. With that being the last question, I'm going to say thank you very much for your time, and I'm going to pass it to Jessica.
Yes,
Thank you.
I first want to thank you so much for being here. Like, it truly does mean a lot. We're definitely going to be putting this on our social media levels and so on, because I truly do feel this was a genuine discussion that would be impactful, especially for a lot of our youth who serve more than one different group that feel that they could be able to relate and connect this with. And that is the biggest reason why we started this Disabled Voices of Color Speaker Series, so we can be able to reach out towards more of our communities, because as we have mentioned in the past, disability does not discriminate. Like, it is very inclusive when it comes to different communities. So it's really important to make sure that all voices are being heard, because we, more than anyone else, knows what it means to oftentimes not be heard or pushed aside. So like, hopefully we're able to create a lot of this individual space and time for folks to reflect and be able to connect with us with. So with that, very grateful to you, very grateful towards our captioner, our ASL interpreters, as well as everyone that was part of this discussion. In addition to that, do want to quickly state that we do have Ed Roberts Day, which is coming up on January 23rd. It falls on a Monday. So we are going to have something happening, but like we're going to give a little bit more clues as we get closer. It's a little bit like a surprise. So just await y'all TBD things which we are currently working on. So with that, I do hope y'all have a beautiful day, and we'll connect very soon. And once again, thank you so much, Dante. It was such a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
For sure.